All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Cognition podcast. As always, I'm Hutch, one of your co-hosts. I am an innovator at a technology company called Trace3. I am the creator of the Sociosploit blog and also the author of the book, The Language of Deception.
And I am Len Noe, technical evangelist for CyberArk, as well as transhuman thought leader and co-host to Hutch. So as he said, welcome. Let's open some minds.
Yep. And today, as always, we're going to talk about some interesting news articles. We're going to start with talking about some billionaire bunkers. We're going to look at OpenAI's new Sora text-to-video model. And then we're also going to talk about how scientists are proposing the modification of viruses in order to fight climate change. And then from there, we're going to jump into the main segment where we talk about whether or not it may be possible to achieve immortality through technology. So really interesting topics, and we'll go ahead and dive into the news.
All right.
So with that, Lynn, did you want to tell us about those billionaire bunkers?
I do. Okay. So, everybody out there right now seems to have some kind of massive fear of the future, whether it's dystopian society, whether it's nuclear war, whether it's AI. Everybody has this doomsday prophetic look at the future. And if you happen to have an extra $400,000 just laying around, you can become like, some of the people on the top tier elite of the social media, AKA Mr. Zuckerberg, excuse me. These are people who are putting in basically bunkers that would survive, biological, radioactive. Some of these things are even coming with water tower or water cannons to squirt away possible paratroopers coming in. If this is the condition that we're at now, number one, I want to say, what about the rest of us? And I really hope that, anybody who has one of these, massive bunkers actually can get to it before their neighbors, because if you're going to drop something that big onto a compound, there's going to be some dump trucks. There's going to be some cranes. Some people are going to know some stuff is going on. And number two, how long do you think you're going to need this? If we have some kind of pathogen, biological agent, nuclear fallout, unless you've got, an entire farm down there, you've got, water filtration, and you're able to live for anywhere between, 1 to 10 to 12 years. This is really cool. And it may be a really cool man cave or a woman cave. But let's be honest, if you're already on a private island, you've got your own security forces. Is this just overkill?
I think it's probably overkill. Island Zuckerberg, right? So this topic is fascinating to me because as a kid, my dad got me into that whole prepper mindset. So he did, even as a young kid, I was bagging dehydrated fruit or food and beans and stuff like that. And we would get the antibiotics from the pet store from the fish so that we didn't have to get stuff over the counter, tubs and tire drums of water. So I always was fascinated by the prepper mentality, but it's interesting to see that kind of you have the normal prepper approach where at most you may have an isolated cabin or possibly just a hole in the ground. And then there's how the other side lives. We see this compound Zuckerberg, which is just an insane amount of land and investment to create, like you said, basically just a glorified man cave to live in for years.
I mean, and let's look at it. I'm going to go step completely off the reservation. Let's even bring in, World War Z, and it's the zombie apocalypse. Again, you're on an island.
You're on an island.
And I agree with you. I'm all for being prepped and ready and trying to be as prepared as I can for any situation. But this is the difference between me and you eating like astronaut ice cream. And this dude has like an entire chef's freezer, 60 feet underground.
Yep.
Touche. I mean, I guess this, if camping with a whole bunch of modern amenity is called glamping. Can this really be called a bunker, or would it be more like a glumper?
I can't say that if I was like Zuckerberg and this didn't even put a dent in my portfolio, that I may do the same.
I can think of a hell of a lot more cool things to spend $400,000 on, but that's just me.
Yep.
It must be nice. I would love to have those kind of problems.
It would be nice. Yep, indeed.
So moving on. So this one here, if you haven't heard about it, I'm going to tee up my brother Hutch here. So OpenAI has now decided to move off of just the textual base. What do you think, brother?
Yeah, so OpenAI just announced their Sora model, which is a text to video model. And what there's no question if you look at some of the videos that have released, and I would encourage you to just Google AI Sora and you'll see some of the example videos they've put out. But what was interesting about this is obviously the videos that they're going to release when they make this announcement are going to be really good. You can assume that those are cherry picked. But then Sam Altman did this thing on Twitter, or now X, where, although everybody still calls it Twitter, where he basically took live prompts from people who were asking for or providing text prompts, and then within minutes was returning the generated videos from them. And while there's no doubt the original ones were cherry picked, those ones weren't quite as good. They were still unbelievably impressive. And if you look at some of the technical documentation that they released, what they essentially did was they took something very similar to the traditional approach of computer vision, where you're tokenizing patches of pixels across images. But then they also provided the transformer architecture that they're using for this time series analysis of how those images change over time for X number of frames. And it seems that this was really the key, because if you look at any other text to video models right now, prior to this one, they were all pretty terrible. We've done really well with text to image, but when we go to text to video, something about the physics of how the real world objects interact with the real world gets lost in that. And so by creating this time series analysis, they seem to have finally unlocked the key to creating videos that do have that sense of real world physics, that sense of object collision, that sense of gravity, and even the concept of object permanence when something goes behind something else, the fact that that object still exists and may appear on the other side. So it's fascinating to see how far we've come in just really, if you look at text to video over the past year to now, what is possible. So really looking forward to getting my hands on this model. Of course, there's also the double-edged sword, the downside of this, that this is the deep fakes are here.
Oh, absolutely, the deep fakes are here. But the one thing that I'm looking at, one of the things that I saw in regards to this technology is did you notice that they're still keeping it to very, very short clips? So I'm actually questioning the validity over larger, longer spans. And in tune with that, how are the AI hallucinations that we're seeing in the standard LLMs going to manifest themselves into some of these? Again, I agree with you. I think this is absolutely amazing technology. Still has a way to go, but this is better than anything that we've seen up to date.
Yep, and I think you're probably right. I think you scale this or you try to output anything beyond. I think they're still shooting for at most like minute-long videos, usually shorter than that. I would imagine that it is going to take a lot more scaling to get to something that can generate. And I think that's true for language models too. If you look at something like ChatGPT, it can write a fantastic essay for school, but it's not going to write you a novel.
No, not at
And
all.
so kind of the same concept. I think it's much easier to get something that can generate something of high fidelity that is of smaller size. And I think over time we're going to have to get to that point to where we can scale to something that, but it may be the case 10 years from now, we continue to scale this thing up, we can create a Hollywood movie within just a small paragraph description or something like that, which is crazy to think.
Well, I don't know about a small paragraph, but just from a prompt in general. I mean, good God, could you imagine someone trying to input the prompt to make Die Hard?
Yep. Well, I guess it depends. With as a lot of the image or text to image generation goes, you can be as vague as you want and let it take on the creativity, or you can be as specific as you want. So I guess in theory, there's a possibility that we get to a point where I just one sentence describe a video, and it's probably not going to be exactly what I have in my mind, but it's possible it'll create a high quality video. Then there's the other option of, like you said, kind of outlining the entire script of Die Hard and then hoping that it tailors it very closely to that. I think the ideal situation is we get a model that can perform or take on whatever level of responsibility of that creativity is required, and lets you kind of decide how much you want to be involved.
And one final thought to you, Hutch. I know we've seen how, according to, at least in the United States, LLM and GPT created content cannot be copywritten because it lacks human interaction. Where do you think that if we keep seeing these types of technology advancements, what do we do? Do you think we're going to have to see changes in legislature or new laws coming on the books, or how can we do this? I mean, let's just realize that if we keep moving down this road, like you said, eventually there's going to be the ability to make a feature film with either a sentence or a paragraph or whatnot. But as of the way things sit right now, you could never monetize that currently.
Yeah, I think this was a lot of the crux of the latest Actors Guild and writers strike that we saw, and I personally haven't dug deep into what they accomplished. I understand that they did get quite a few milestones of what they were wanting to achieve in that regard, because I think this was one of the big concerns, is that these capabilities are knocking on the door, the ability to have a decent career as a writer for video content or as an actor, especially like you look at voice actors or even real world actors. But ultimately, you have these systems that have trained on the output that all of these actors and writers have created. So I think they were largely advocating for having some kind of long term profit sharing from what is ultimately going to be derived from the works that they historically created. Um,
It
Again,
does.
haven't looked into the details, but I think there's probably there's no doubt more conversation to be had here.
Yeah. One thing that I would leave the listeners to challenge, to think about, is if we get to a point where, say, and we've seen this even with Robert De Niro in one of his recent films, where they had actually used AI to make him look younger in an earlier part of the movie. Let's take that, and maybe we can take this offline as a poll or a polling question. How do you see that would work in terms of, can an actor like, say, Sylvester Stallone or Robert De Niro, who may be getting past the point where they would be able to do a lot of those action scenes, is there a market for actors after they decide they no longer want to act, by actually licensing their own image for additional works beyond their actual physical interaction?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt going to be future financial models that look like that. I think the question is figuring out what the appropriate valuation is for the likeness of a human when you're talking about using it at this kind of scale. So I think I'm sure there's all kinds of interesting legal and copyright and intellectual property questions going on related to that.
Maybe we should dig into that a little bit
Need,
for a
need to
future
find us
episode.
an intellectual property lawyer to come on and talk to it, because
I
yeah, I think
have
it
one.
would be a fascinating conversation.
I actually have one.
All right, yeah, something to circle
So
back on. All right.
absolutely.
Well, with that, Len, you want to tell us about the viruses that are being
Oh,
manipulated in order to try to help fight climate change?
we have actually gotten to the point where I think, as humans, we are starting to play the role of some kind of deity way too much. We are now essentially talking about trying to hack the environment and basically use microbes and different organisms that have been frozen in glacial ice to try and act as a carbon absorption unit to try and lower the carbon emissions that we're currently having. I think we've seen movie after movie on this where man tries to mess with the climate, and it never ends well for us. And beyond that, just as one person on the outside looking in, We hear about this all the time. Scientists are proposing this. Medical scientists are proposing this. Where are they proposing all this stuff, and why are we not hearing about it until they're at the point where they're about to mess with something that we may not be able to undo?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think a little bit more. I'm probably on the fence on this one. I do think that we're in a situation with the problems related to carbon capture where we need to figure out ways to use very fast emerging technology in order to change something that's spinning out of control. But at the same time, I think that there is, similar to what we talked about on the last episode, there's this problem of the law of unintended consequences, where we start manipulating with this extremely complex environmental ecosystem. And sometimes it's hard to know exactly what the outcome will be. I think in this case, there is the possibility of something like a bullwhip effect, where we try to manipulate or introduce viruses that are biological again, and we can't really predict the full scale of how they're going to populate and uh, mutate over time. And so we introduce this to try to minimize the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. And while right now we are very much in a place where we need to minimize the amount of carbon in this atmosphere, there is a certain necessary level of carbon that needs to be in the atmosphere. And what if we
Overshoot
introduce
the other
a
way.
solution like this, we overcompensate and we create a world where even functional levels of carbon are being depleted, and then we have to try to find some other crazy solution to solve that. And so I think there definitely needs to be conversation here of, and of course I'm not a biological scientist, so I think that people way above my pay grade need to be weighing in on this conversation, but need to at least be asking that question of, what are the chances or what are the possibilities of problems that come out of this beyond just the intended positive effects that we want to get out of it.
I mean, realistically, we don't know what types of organisms that may be frozen that hasn't even seen the light of day in half a millennia. We don't know what's in there. We may go after one virus and release some other microorganism that could be even more detrimental to the long-term success of humanity and the planet. Just as a side note, and I
Just
love how you said that we need a new technological advance to deal with the carbon crisis we currently have. They're not looking at new, and that's kind of scary. There's nothing new at all, and we may be playing with ancient things that we don't know the potential damage that it could do. It could be worse than the carbon climate issue. We don't know. So
yep.
I agree. There needs to be some very high paid biochemists and scientists talking about this before we just go start messing with the entire global ecosystem.
Let's just add it as one more thing to our massive growing list of potential existential risks to this planet, right?
Yeah. At some point, I'd like to cap the list and start trying to work things off the list instead of just continuously adding new things to it.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know if there's enough other people that are interested in the same. But
Agreed.
this is where
So,
we are.
yeah, this is it. And now it's time for our main segment. So
Yep.
let me ask you, Hutch, before we start deep diving into this, let me ask you, because everybody, this is something that as a transhuman and a futurist, I get asked about all the time. They're like, do you want to live forever, man? Do you want to upload your No, I don't. If I had the opportunity of immortality, I personally, before we even start, I'm going to just throw it out there, I would not want it.
Interesting. I think I am on the other end of that spectrum. I love life. I think that one lifetime is not enough to experience everything that's out there. I don't know if immortality, maybe at some point there's diminishing returns on existing, but I think I definitely would like more than 80 to 100 years. So I think I'm probably on the other side of that. But again, I should caveat that with saying I would like more than 80 to 100 years of healthy life. I think there's something to be said for aging
Miserable
and
life.
all of the discomfort that comes with that. That maybe if it is that we can live to 150 years old, but we're going to feel the aging all the way through, then maybe not as much interested in that.
And to that point, that's why we have a lot of really cool points that we're going to be getting to talk through today.
Yep.
So
So kind of structured this out, and me and Len talked about this, kind of some different ways in which technology offers something along the lines of a promise of immortality, or maybe not even immortality, but for seriously extending the longevity of the human lifespan. And I think that as we have all of these dramatic changes in technology, that inevitably is contributing to what has always been kind of that perceived holy grail, that fountain of youth. How can we, and even if Lynn is ready to at some point be putting a hole in the ground, there are a lot of people like me that would uh, do anything to try to exist for a long time or for forever. And so I think that there's always been this interest, but now there's a lot of ways where technology is potentially offering at least the
Illusion,
speculative promise of
illusion,
immortality,
the
possibly illusion of immortality.
illusion of immortality. You know,
Well, since we're talking about the illusion of immortality, I guess let's check the first one off the list and talk about cryogenics.
absolutely. I
So,
mean,
so Lynn, you're not wanting to be put on a bag of ice and filled with liquid
no,
nitrogen?
no, no, sorry. The idea of liquid nitrogen, I don't like a cold shower, let alone a cold submersion that cold. And unfortunately, that even one of the people that I look up to in terms of being a futurist, I'm FM 2030, one of the godfathers of cryogenics. The dude is even currently frozen in the hopes that he's going to wake up someday. But you and I have both discussed this. I don't see cryogenics as a real logical solution to long term, expanded lifespan. I mean, I think at the core of cryogenetics, we have to look at the fact that the human body is going to age. And if we're looking at true paths to either simulated immortality or actual the ability to have a consciousness that can live on forever, I think the one thing we also have to agree on is the physical form that we're born into is going to have to be shut off at some point.
Yeah, cryogenics, I think, is definitely the most primitive of, I think, the approaches that we're going to talk about today. I did do some research into some of the leading innovations lately within cryogenics, and I found really that there's kind of two companies in the United States that give you this option. So there's the Cryogenics Institute, which it sounds like they take largely the traditional approach. They're the cheaper option, so $20,000 to $40,000, and they essentially do exactly what we talked about. They drop you into a vat of liquid nitrogen. And there's been a lot of research to show that if you put a body through that, you get essentially ice crystals that start forming into the cells that
Cellular,
start shattering this at the cellular
cellular
level, the entire
destruction.
body. Yeah,
Cellular
absolutely.
destruction.
So not an ideal way to go. I think that there's very little potential to revive somebody after their body has gone through that kind of damage. There is an interesting company called Alcor that I found that now this is the Rolls Royce of cryogenics. And for this, you're looking at, if you want to just freeze your head, somewhere around $80,000. If you want to do full cryogenic preservation of your entire body, you're looking at closer to $250,000. And what was interesting about this company is that they do have a very advanced chemical process to achieve vitrification. So essentially, the idea of filling your veins with something comparable to antifreeze to prevent those ice crystals from forming. And it was also really interesting to dig into their price structure, because the reason that they settle on that $250,000 is there is a fee for kind of storage and a fee for obviously,
Oh,
they make some profit off of it, but a big chunk of it, I think in the area of a little over $100,000, is actually placed into an investment trust. And the idea is that the output or the returns from that investment trust should, in theory, as long as the market doesn't at some point completely collapse, that the returns should over time continue to cover the costs of the liquid nitrogen and continued storage of the body. So definitely an interesting space that there actually are some emerging innovations in. I don't think this is the route that I would want to go.
and even beyond that, just if we look at it from the standpoint of, roadmap, we don't really, let's just say the thawing process, I think it's going to be a little bit different than Demolition Man, when Stallone got just kind of lasered out of the block of ice, and then you just get the steam.
Well, obviously, you just take a sledgehammer to him, right?
But let's think about it. In regards to cryogenics, especially outside of the fertility portion of medical, where we have seen a lot of great success with being able to freeze embryos and thaw embryos, there's nothing out there that I'm personally aware of within my research in everybody in terms of being in cryostasis. They're already technically dead.
Yeah, and I think this circles back to what you mentioned of the illusion of immortality. We really don't know how to bring people back. We don't know what that thawing process will look like, and we really don't know if it's even going to be feasible, even if you are preserved in the fancy Rolls-Royce method of the Alcor labs, if you would actually be able to bring people back at some point.
And that was what I was going to say in terms of Alcor. Part of that investment portfolio is also to potentially be able to come up with a way to wake you back up. We've got the putting you under down, but realistically, we don't have the way to bring you out. So,
yep, I think you're right. There was part of it that was a research fund for funding additional research to hopefully one day get there.
But to that point, with the ability to have robots, cybernetics, exoskeletons, all the things that we're seeing with brain computer interfaces, why would you want your old body? I mean, let me ask you that straight up. I mean, you already said you want to jump on the immortality train, and we're, especially as we start getting down into the technological augmentation, if you could have your body that you have right now, or if you could have, say, some kind of mechanical body with enhancements that are beyond a human, which one would you want?
Yeah, I think that this route, the route of technical augmentation, does definitely provide a more feasible potential future for something akin to immortality. I think that personally, I don't want to be part of the pilot program like you, Lynn. I think that it makes me nervous, but I am glad that there are pioneers out there that are willing to push the edge of what is possible in regard to, because I think that at the end of the day, we are talking about a hardware problem. We are talking
Absolutely.
about the fact that our bodies, because of the way that we age over time, it's that question of sustainability of hardware. And we operate on, I guess, just a different substrate than technology. But at the end of the day, it is, as far as we understand it, a very physical process. And so I think that there is an argument for, and we've already seen it. I mean, we've seen technology be used to replicate the function of full organs. We've seen.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the simplest answer is look at a dialysis machine.
Yep.
That's something that everybody can understand. It may not be 23rd century, but this is a machine that has completely replaced the function of a kidney and allows a human being to maintain existence even without one that works in their body.
I think one of the interesting areas, of course, is, and I think that to some extent it's speculative. I don't know how much is actually being done in hidden secret labs on this, but the idea of this nanobot technology, where you've got something that is operating at the minute cellular level and is able to scan, analyze pass through all of your different arteries, veins, capillaries, and kind of scan your entire body from the inside, and possibly even take corrective action, operating in something that is very similar to the capacity of the human cell, but from a technological perspective.
Oh, nanotechnology is going to be, just earth shattering in both a positive and, I feel, a potentially negative way. I mean, one of the things you have to remember when we're talking about nanotechnology, this is stuff that is small enough that actually it can be inhaled just as part of a water vapor. And once that stuff kind of gets into your lungs, it's not going anywhere. So just like anything else with technology, I think we have the ability to do microsurgeries, potentially brain repairs, aneurysm, surgeries. This type of technology, in conjunction with additional medical breakthroughs, you know, actually is going to lead towards the ability to not necessarily be immortal, but just not die through natural abilities of modern medical science. And that, when we talk about technical augmentation, it's not just microchips in your body like me, or potentially a prosthetic, a pacemaker. This is medical science, period. Remember at one point when we only had x-rays, then we got CT scans, now we have MRIs, and we can literally look at the body in 3D, in
Looking
slice.
closer and closer and getting higher fidelity understanding of what's going on. Yep.
Absolutely. So when we say technical augmentation, it's not necessarily at the individual level, but the actual science around medicine as a whole.
Yep. So the last topic is that or I guess the last route that we kind of discussed in terms of a path to immortality based on technology, is this idea of digitalization of the consciousness. And we've talked about this to some extent in previous episodes where we talked about brain-computer interfaces. But it's this, and of course, it's hard to say exactly what the route to the digitalization of consciousness looks like. It could be something like a brain-computer interface. It also could be something like we were talking about with nanotechnology, where it's moving through the capillaries of the brain and from the inside out, mapping what's going on. But it's essentially this idea of if, and this is the large if human consciousness is a purely physical phenomenon, then in theory, if we can map it, understand exactly what's going on, in theory, we should be able to replicate that within a digital environment. The brain is largely just electrical signals that are firing off. And so I don't know, Len, what are your thoughts on this approach?
Oh, honestly, this one would be my preferred method if I was going to go down that rabbit hole. The issue when it comes to BCI, we've seen, I don't know if you noticed on the news last week, there was an update from the gentleman that got the Neuralink implant, and they're actually able to actually move and work a mouse cursor through brainwaves. This is amazing. But at this point, we're still moving in one direction. It's from the brain out to a receiver. We also have to remember, when it comes down to it, you know me, Hutch. I love my statistics, and I came in today ready. Did you know that the brain actually houses around 86 billion neurons and 85 billion non-neuronical cells within the brain? And that's with an estimated 1 million billion neural connections for the human brain. And just by comparison, the Milky Way galaxy is only home to about 200 billion stars. And I'm going to say that again. In terms of neural connections within the human brain, 1 million billion neural connections. So this is beyond anything we could probably honestly fathom. We're going to have to be able to map every single one of those, just like when they actually went through it and mapped the human genome. Is it possible? Absolutely. It's not going to be coming quick. But then that actually gives rise to a couple of different questions. For example, what is the consciousness? Can the consciousness exist in two places simultaneously?
Yeah. Because I guess there is that question of, if we are able to replicate it digitally, that doesn't necessarily mean we have to wait until you die to replicate it, right? We could create your digital form while you are still existing in the physical form.
One of the things that I came out of my initial research for this is basically things are falling into one of three different categories in terms of, the ability for mind uploading or mind mapping. And the first is the technology, is the technology assumption, will we be able to develop mind uploading technology within the coming decades? From there, the second is the artificial mind assumption. The idea that a simulated brain would actually give rise to a real mind. So if we started while they're both alive, would the one that's completely digital take off at a different angle than the physical brain. And then the third was the survival assumption. And that would be the idea that the person created in the process is really only you when your physical mortal coil sheds. And otherwise, at that point, is it you or not? So this is the three big trains of thought in terms of the concept of mind upload theory, and typically it's going to fall into one of those three categories in terms of why we're not doing it yet. But I've seen a lot of people who are saying that the expectation for at least basic, simple neural download and upload possibilities, we should start seeing somewhere between 2035 and 2040.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, and it'll be a weird journey to get there. But I think I tend to lean towards the direction in those challenges you were mentioning of thinking that if we were to create a digital consciousness, that maybe it would be conscious, but I don't think it would be your consciousness. I think maybe another instance of, or something akin to creating a biological clone, where you've got something that biologically in all capacities is identical to you, but I think presumably it's generally understood that if you have a clone and a regular person, there are two separate subjective experiences going on, two separate consciousnesses. And I think we ultimately would hit the same with kind of a digital replication, is maybe we can create consciousness, but I don't think that don't kill the guy that you created it from immediately and just expect him to spin over to the other one, because I think that's probably not how it would work. But again, a lot of that is speculation and intuition.
Absolutely. And at some point, you and I have had these conversations, but I want to throw it out there too. What happens to your consciousness if you do go with a mind upload? At that point, there was actually a TV show called Upload that, it plays right into this topic. What happened, just like in today's world, if you need to have bandwidth in order to do things, if you upload your consciousness, is it going to be a tiered structure? Is it going to be like your basic package? You get to live in the basement of the web, and you have a little area that you can call your home, almost like in the metaverse. Is that what it is? Is it the metaverse then become the next phase of symbiotic style existence?
And it's an interesting question, because then that begs the question of whether we as biological organisms could enter something like a virtual reality or a metaverse and then interact with digitally created instances of people that formerly existed in the real world.
Well, I'm going to flip that around and let's look at that from the other direction. If I'm a very wealthy person and I download my consciousness, am I stuck in that digital world, or through the use of robotics, can I come out of the digital world and interface back in the real world through some type of UI to a robotic, exoskeleton?
Yeah, it's and this is that kind of all the weird ambiguity that we move into as we start, and I think it largely surrounds the fact that we still don't have a clue what's going on as far as consciousness, or what that even is, when we get down to the technical details of what is happening here. So I
And
think that
but let's ask the bigger question: why? And if we take a look at the original question of Ponce de Leon's quest for the fountain of youth, if you think about the life expectancy over time back then, it was late 20s, early 30s. Now with modern medicine, like you said, it's 80s to 100. But what is the point of living that long just to live?
I think a lot of it is fear. Like, and I think that's largely what it is for me, is the fear of the unknown. I don't know what's going to happen. I have such a hard time wrapping my brain around this idea of ceasing to exist. And I don't want to dive too deep into religion, but I'm also largely agnostic and kind of the perspective that I don't know what all is going on here, and I'm okay with that. But the concept of just ceasing to exist, to me, and I would imagine this is the case with a lot of people, is terrifying.
Oh,
So
I, I
I don't know if it's so much that we want to live forever. It's that maybe we don't want to die.
That's entirely possible. But even if you take any of these options, I mean, at this point, I think we can actually start talking about um, the longevity escape velocity. You know, and for do you want to try and explain this, because this is the antithesis of what we were just talking about in terms of uploading your mind.
Yeah, so I think that largely the idea of the longevity escape velocity comes from Ray Kurzweil, who has long been a really fascinating futurist that has largely had this kind of obsession with obtaining immortality. And the perspective is largely wrapped in this idea that we are consistently seeing technology contribute to better and better healthcare capabilities, medical capabilities. Year over year, we are seeing an increase in the average lifespan of a human. And it stands to reason that as technology continues to take off at what seems like an exponential curve, that the exponential increase in that technology is inevitably going to pull with it medical innovation. And so there is, and this is largely speculative, because right now, if you look at, and for those of you that are watching the video, you can see this, but for anybody that's just listening, I'll explain it the best that I can. But you can see that from 1950 to today, we have seen about a 10-year increase in the average lifespan. And currently, from 1950 to today, when you look at that chart, it looks like a linear increase. That is to say that the rate of change isn't changing significantly. It is increasing. The average lifespan is increasing year over year, but the rate of change is not increasing significantly. But people like Ray Kurzweil believe that as we continue to see this unbelievable exponential growth in technology, inevitably with that, it is going to pull that rate of change of the average human lifespan up with it. And so there's this speculative moment at some point in the future where if we hit a point where the average lifespan is growing faster than the aging process, that's to say, if the average lifespan is increasing every or 2 years every year, then we've essentially achieved that escape velocity. We're going to make it to immortality because we are now increasing the average lifespan of human faster than humans are aging. And so for me, at close to 40 years old, we don't have to achieve immortality in the next 40 years, as long as we achieve that longevity escape velocity where we see that exponential growth in technology contributing back to medical science to such a degree that we see that tremendous growth in the reduction of aging and sickness and illness and all that comes with that. So a really tough concept to understand in simple terms, but I guess breaking it down into the most simple terms, if we see the average lifespan growing faster than people age, then if we get to that point, we've made it. So I guess when we're talking about longevity escape velocity, we're really talking about the progress of medical science. And do we get to a point where medical science moves fast enough that everybody that is alive at the time is benefits from that?
Benefits from
I think that there's something interesting to say about all of these, though, is that we are at this interesting time where we're close. Like we can see it with each of these different options and the advances that we're seeing in technology, but we're in that awkward space or that point in history where it's going to be so messy. Like you take any of these paths towards quote unquote immortality, and it's not going to be a smooth ride. Like there's going to be weird things that happen. There's going to be all kinds of problems. To your point, it may just be a lure, and we may never even get there. But I think that it's timing is an interesting one. But with that, I mean, I guess let's talk briefly about the challenges. That's obviously one of them. Is for people that are currently alive today, timing is a big question. Do we achieve this? I mean, for anybody, I think there is that personal question of, do we achieve something similar to this in any of those three pathways within a time frame that I could benefit from it?
I think we could. I really do. Especially around the BCI and the concept of brain uploading. The estimation is within, it's 2024. They're saying the estimation is between 2035 and 40. We're still going to be alive, and we may be getting, well, me more than you, because You're like, I'm almost 40, and I'm like, oh, I remember that day, those days, man. I'm pushing. I'll be 50 here this year. But in terms of timing, I'm going to take a step down to the second bullet point of ethics. I don't think, and these are my opinions, and yes, I'm the weirdo with all the chips, but I don't think we're meant to be here forever. And I question what a life where I don't have to worry about dying is. I don't feel like that would be a life I'd want to live. If there was no fear, if there was nothing to make me stop and take pause before doing something, to me, that's not living.
Yeah, and I think there is some nuance here, because I think most of these different routes that we're talking about, if not all of them, when we talk about immortality, we're really not talking about you can't die. So I think there is still some element of fear, because at the end of the day, even if we have such advanced medical science that we can reverse aging,
Well, if we step
I mean,
away,
you just get exploded by a bomb or splattered by a bus or something. Like, it's still going to be the end, right? Like, we can try to piece you
not
back together. Maybe
necessarily.
we'll get there.
Well, let me ask you this: if your computer, if your laptop blew up right now and your hard drive was toast, as long as you have a backup of your data, can you not put that data back down onto another laptop?
That's fair. Yeah, no, you're right. So I
That's
guess you take the digitalization route, and
yeah.
you're right.
I'm
Zero fear of death.
and even if let's be honest, if we get to the point where we have made those types of medical advances, even in terms of the physical human being, at that point, we have to be able to understand the concepts of molecular structures and molecular regeneration. So even if you were potentially blown up by some kind of, explosion, as long as we have enough parts to put back together,
If
who's
we
to
got the
say
data. Yeah.
you couldn't recover the data?
Yep.
And to that point, if we have the ability to do brain downloads and brain uploads, is that information in the brain only there when the brain is alive? Could it be something that, hypothetically in the future, we could, after death, as long as the brain is intact, could we take the synopsis and actually re-energize it with some type of a power source and download that? This is all science fiction, but it's all plausible concepts when we're looking at what we're talking about.
Yeah. So I think another interesting problem is we do get to a point where we talk about achieving immortality. There's two other major societal issues that we may have to deal with. One of those, of course, is the challenge of population growth. It's this idea that we if nobody's dying, if nobody can die, then how do we deal with the growing population? And I think the digitalization option, probably this is not as much of a problem. But if we talk about advances in medical science or human augmentation to such a point where, physically speaking, we still can exist for practically for eternity, then we only have so much room to expand to, right? So
I don't think that's going to be the issue, though, Hutch. I mean, let's be honest. Even when it comes to today, like when we were talking about the cryogenics, the only people that can afford that kind of treatment are going to be the extremely wealthy. The ability to keep your own body is going to probably be kind of like the vanity side for the rich. All the rest of us, we're going to be just downloading our consciousness and going into the web. We're not going to have those types of opportunities just from a monetary perspective. I mean, take a look at the difference. 400,000, $250,000 compared to 20 grand.
yep,
You know,
it'll be the people with their billionaire bunkers that get to physically continue to exist in the world.
bingo.
Yeah,
Well,
I think you're right. I think we
go
hit
ahead.
a point where we almost have this potential. Well, we know even today that medical science is not equally available to all. It
Not at all.
is those that are wealthy, those that can afford the extremely high price of life-saving drugs that are powered by extremely expensive R&D initiatives, get to benefit from them, while there are a lot of people that, even if they have insurance, still can't afford the astronomical prices of some of these treatments. And so I think inevitably we follow that to its logical conclusion. If we do achieve something like immortality, obviously the
It's
price
going to be a
tag for
tiered
that
it's
type
going
of
to be a tiered
capability can be anything they want, especially if there is any kind of monopolistic structure there. And so I think that you've got the extremely wealthy, the people that currently have their $400,000 bunkers, that become godlike people that get to live forever. And then the average person maybe just lives out these short, depressing lives and maybe ends up in this weird afterlife of digitalization.
Let's be honest. In the afterlife, we're all going to be living, at 444, S3 Bucket Way. That's going to be my new address.
Yeah. Which
But
I think also begs the question, which could be an episode in itself, is that whole simulation hypothesis of, are we already there?
Well, good Lord, I hope not. Because if we're already in the simulation, I wish somebody would have, put a little bit more in terms of my starting values. Because it's kind of like when you were playing
started you with higher specs and higher perks.
Yeah, you remember playing Dungeons and Dragons when you were a kid, man. You only start with so many points, and you got to spread those between dexterity and wisdom and intelligence and everything else. But the truth is, the future is going to be. I love the photo you used for this slide, because we're living in a Frankenstein world, but it's not necessarily of only the flesh anymore. And that's what we got to realize. Frankenstein's monster could be nothing more than, a couple of lines of code. It doesn't have to be, on a table, with a big lightning rod out the ceiling, waiting for the storm to bring it to life.
Absolutely. And I think, as always, I don't know if we really solved any of the problems here, but I think these are always fascinating conversations to have. I've really enjoyed just kind of thinking through and even doing the research with you to look at the different ways that technology is starting to try to tackle this problem and some of the weird nuances with it. I think if nothing else, we can all agree that the future is going to be really weird and something to look forward to.
Yep. And like I said, when my time's up, I don't want to be put in the ground, but put me in an urn somewhere, step me over a bar. But I don't, I want to be here not for a long time, but for a purpose. So with that, thank you for another great conversation, Hutch.
Yep, was a pleasure as always.
Thank you all for listening, and be sure to leave us some comments. We, reach out. We love hearing from you. And if we make you think about something different, let us know.
Yep. And with that, Cyber Cognition over and out. Cheers.
Peace.